So, if you've ever been in a kind of fear response, even if it's just like a little bit of nerves or panic, then you know what that's like. It's very, very physical, and it can be terrible.
Because I get that now, like, because of my needle thing. Like, even when I go to the doctor or the dentist, and I know there's not really a chance I'm going to get a needle, I start feeling anxious.
Yeah. So this is the power of association. So what happens is something can happen, and for whatever reason, who knows why, we could talk for hours about that kind of past conditioning stuff, but your body goes into fight or flight mode, so it freaks out in response to something. And that something could be a needle, it could be a dentist, it could be a spider, it could be a peach.
Yeah.
And so what your brain cleverly does is it takes all of that yucky freak out feeling and it attaches it or associates it to whatever it was that caused that at that time. So that's what we might call a simple phobia. It's very, very clear conditioning. It's like that equals danger. And so your brain remembers the stimulus, it remembers the threat, and it remembers it because it wants you to get away from it. And so that's why you can very easily just think about something and get the same response, even though it's not in front of you. And that's your brain saying, remember this is dangerous, remember this is dangerous, And in the old days when we used that for survival, it would have been a tiger, sitting outside your hut, and it would have been, remember what a tiger looks like, so next time you know what to do, right? So it's your brain doing something that's survival. But what happens in this day and age is that there's so many things that we can get afraid of, and we've got all of this extra stimulus that we don't really need, and it's not actually a threat to our survival, but because we've got so much of it, your brain perceives that it is. And that's why we can get phobias so easily.
Right.
So that's the simple one.
So why on earth would I get scared of a peach?
Well, I don't know. So I'll go through the others and you might be able to find out, right? Because that's quite an obvious one, that you've had a bad experience and you might remember that bad experience, but often people don't remember it, right?
Well, that's what's really, like, with my thing, because actually after we started talking about it last time, I went away and I actually called my mum. Because I was little, I was only about 8. And I said to her, I was like, was there anything actually weird about this? Or, and she just said, well, no, your reaction was perfectly normal for a kid of that age, and it does hurt, and you were scared. But it was weird because in my mind it's such a huge thing.
But that's how your brain's remembered it, because it's trying to keep you, it's perceived as a real threat, it's trying to keep you safe. But the other thing that can happen, which I find really fascinating, is you don't have an experience that's kind of directly related to that thing being a threat, but you have a terrible experience in the context of it. So, for example, one of my case studies that I worked with, a lady, and I can name her because I've written an article about her, and so we've got that agreement. But Denise had a phobia of flying, and she had it for about 40 years. And it completely debilitated her because her husband liked to travel. And they really wanted to travel, had all these plans, and she would wind herself up so much that she'd have to knock herself out with Valium, and the Valium still wouldn't really work. And, she couldn't even get to Auckland without being completely strung out by this. She'd kind of arrive, it would take her a day to recover, start enjoying yourself, and then it was time to start thinking about the horror of the flight on the way back, right? So it's just no enjoyment in the whole thing. But what had happened to her, which is very common, which is what we call a complex phobia, is that she'd had her first experience on a plane, she'd had a panic attack. And it was such an awful panic attack that they had to get the oxygen mask and give her oxygen. And so for what she was afraid of was not the plane crashing, that didn't even enter into her head at all, but she was afraid of the possibility of having another panic attack
on a
which
plane.
was highly embarrassing, and that's what she got so panicky about. And she generalised that to not just planes, but boats. She was okay. She was okay in cars. I remember plane and boats. I don't know if trains were an issue, but that's what
public
anything that you'd be in public and it would be travel, so you can't get out of it because you can't stop a plane, right? You can't stop a boat. So that becomes more about fear of having a horrible experience as opposed to that experience itself actually being threatening. It's more the embarrassment and the fear of that happening again. And that's real fascinating. And still, you can still change it, but it's a few more layers to it. And the other thing that can happen is secondary conditioning or secondary association, which is when you kind of see somebody else freaking out about something, and then your brain thinks, oh my God, that must be really serious, I better freak out about that. And it might happen really subliminally, you don't even realise it at the time, and before you know it, you kind of freak out about something. And it's especially strong if we have, our earliest role models, like our parents, caregivers, teachers, or elder siblings or whatever. If they've done that quite strongly, and if they do that repeatedly, then you do get that message that, hey, this thing's dangerous. And so, kind of like how some people have what we might call like generalised anxiety, or they seem to become phobic of everything. And that's just your brain doing again what it's designed to do, which is to keep you safe, because it's kind of saying, well, that thing's like that thing, and then that thing's like that thing. So if it's, a train's like a plane and a plane's like a car, and so now we need to be afraid of all of them. Yeah. And that's how I believe that agoraphobia can develop, that phobia where you, don't want to leave the house because everything becomes scary.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the interesting thing as well is, like, why is it that we seem to have phobias of things more than other things? So, like, comic books are kind of, that's not really a threat. We don't really know a lot of people with that phobia, but we know a lot of people that have fear of heights or needles, for example, or spiders. And one theory about that is, and I'm not sure the technical name for it, but I did it in my degree, and I did a whole project on it, which is around that there's kind of things that were perceived as threatening way back, like from original times when we were hunter-gatherers, and your brain's kind of got a record of that, and that's just been passed down to you, that they're kind of common things that would have been threatening to your survival. So snakes would be one of those things, heights definitely would be. Spiders. And spiders, I think, would have come from medieval times, because they were associated with the spread of the plague, even though that wasn't true.
Really?
Yeah. I'm not clear on the dates or the facts, but I do remember that very clearly, and the same with rats. Right. So it's kind of like we've become more disposed to being afraid of them because they posed a real threat to us, so our brain's kind of got that information that's been handed down. So that's how you can get one, and you can be phobic of anything. It just depends what happens. But you can change it, because you need to just be able to teach your brain that particular thing is not a threat. And you can learn that.
That would be great.
You can, absolutely.
Because I've been putting off going to the dentist for 2 years.
Yeah, because that's what happens, right?
I'm going to get teeth out.
Eating peaches.
Yeah, but you can, because it's just your nervous system having marked something out as dangerous that isn't. And it can be trained.
It can be trained. I can eat peaches.
Not logically, but that particular thing is, for some reason, it's abhorrent to your system, and that means that your brain thinks it's threatening to you. It's not logically, don't get me wrong, it's not a logical perception of threat, because people know that frogs don't kill them. You know that a needle's, it's just the illogical, it's just your brain going into that state, which is freak out state.
Some frogs are poisonous, though.
Say that again, sorry?
I said some frogs are poisonous, though.
Yeah, sure. But we don't need a fight or flight response to deal with them, right?
That's true.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, but comic books are not dangerous, for example.
Unless you paper cuts.
Christine, you're not helping those people with comics.
Sorry, comic phobia.
So it's important to know that it's not about your brain kind of logically thinking this through. It's about an unfortunate association.
Right. Yeah.
And it's built on that basic level of survival that we have to survive, and that's why we've still got that fight or flight mode. But you can train your brain to know that it's not a threat. Yeah. Then you can have your nervous system respond in a more even way. But I've helped a lot of people with this.
Cool.
It's fun, eh?
Yeah, it must be.
Well, so what actually happened with the lady with the plane phobia?
Well, she's flying all over the place now.
Can't keep her away from the plane.
She jokes often, like her husband's always like, can we reverse this, because she's getting me bankrupt. But yeah, she's just an ongoing success story. And
so so you wouldn't have treated her necessarily by because for me, rationally, I would be like, well, what's the big deal if you do have a panic attack on a plane?
Yeah.
But that's actually not going to help someone in that situation, is it?
Because if everything was a question of thinking it through rationally, nobody would have a problem ever.
No.
Ever.
Well, no.
Well, you just wouldn't, because, it's always the case that your rational mind kind of knows that this is okay. It knows that it's not really going to happen again just because it happened once.
But some people's irrational minds are stronger than their rational minds.
Yeah, so that's and that to me is a difference between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind.
Right.
So it's your unconscious mind that's generating that response, right? And that's the part that feels irrational. Yeah. But unfortunately, that is the stronger part of you. Yeah. And so that's where we need to go to make the change, because if it was just a question of you kind of thinking it through, then you would have done it years ago. Just convince yourself. But it's like, what are the connections, what are the neural connections that are firing in response to that particular thing for you?
Yeah.
And what does that result in the nervous system? And what we need to do there is change it on that level. Yeah. And that's where the NLP strategies and techniques come into it. The thing, the belief that's, I guess, new about what I'm saying is, there's so much work and research going into discovering how people become phobic.
Yeah.
And why phobias exist and all of that, all of that kind of back stuff.
Yeah.
And that's all very interesting, but it doesn't mean that you have to, spend years overcoming a phobia, because for your brain to make that association would have taken probably about 30 seconds to say, this thing is dangerous, let's wrap this feeling around it. And so it doesn't need to take so long to undo it.
No.
So, for example, with Denise, we had an agreement that I was going to work with her and she was going to let me write an article about her and talk about her case. And I knew that it was a complex phobia because I'd interviewed her before, and I wasn't sure how long it would take because it's got several layers to it. But she was done and dusted in 5 sessions.
Gosh.
Yeah, and she'd had a 40-year phobia. A phobia of, it was just awful for her that she couldn't do the stuff that she wanted to do. And now it's just like this whole lease of life, And she works with a friend of mine, which is how I found out about her. And the other day I got some feedback that she's like, "Oh, tell Charlotte I can go through car washes now."
She can go through car washes.
Yeah, so, that's something that she couldn't do before. So that's how the extent to which her brain had generalised that. So it's, when you change that one thing, so many other things can change. But it is a new way of thinking about it. And yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you. That was really interesting.
Okay. Any other questions, Christine? You're welcome to have them, because I think it is a new way.
Well, if you do want to find out more, you have a blog and stuff, don't you?
I do. You can get to it through my website, which is charlottechange.com. Charlotte. And if you just click on blog, and if you do a search for phobias, then there's a whole article written on that if you want some more information.
All right, excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for joining us,
pleasure.
Charlotte. We will see you next month.
Thank you.
Excellent.